I just saw this again, and it shocks me that this is still going on. The comparison in terms of Clinton trying to claim that her tenure as Secretary of State, in terms of what she did, is at all comparable to what Colin Powell did during his time. I'm not claiming that Colin Powell, for starters, had a perfect tenure, had a perfect track record. I'm not at all. But I read carefully through the Office of Inspector General's report, and I've seen since what they've done. And I also know what technology was like, unlike some younger millennials who are either too young, or in some cases I don't think they might have been born yet during Powell's time in office, in a Secretary of State. But in any case, during his time, email was definitely there, but the government had not yet caught up to the private sector, either in its regulations for how emails should be cataloged, electronic communication should be cataloged. There wasn't really a system for it. The only system that existed during Colin Powell's time in terms of regulations was that at or by the end of your time in office as Secretary of State, you had to print out and then put into file cabinets all of your emails and all of any messages that you got, along with all transcripts of any conversations that were held. So there wasn't, and therefore there wasn't any better system than that, than, again, printing everything out and putting it into file cabinets. And that's one of the reasons that it was, and it is definitely possible that some of the documents, in terms of individual emails, might not have been locatable, not even necessarily because they weren't properly printed out as per protocol, but because someone might have, in terms of their request for information or whatever, gotten the term wrong or gotten the date wrong, because there wasn't even any specific standard as to how they should be organized in those file cabinets even. So depending upon when they were printed out, unless the staff was extremely steady and extremely diligent, either someone could have indeed accidentally forgotten to print out one, skipped one, or they could, they could have filed something differently in a different way depending upon who was doing it at the moment, which is to say by a different keyword, or just looking at the top of the document and deciding which one of these is going to be the keyword with which we're going to file this, if there were multiple correspondences during a given day, because back then it depended upon the email system as to whether you would have the time code stamped on the email or not. Most of the time you did, but sometimes you didn't. And keep in mind, if you had multiple correspondence occurring within like 5 minutes, it might not have been an accurate enough time coding. And again, also, when you're trying to look back on something, you might not know the exact time coding. And again, back then, even when you did have time coding, it wasn't necessarily accurate to more than within 5 minutes. Today, the time codex is going to be accurate within 5 to 10 seconds. By the time of Clinton's tenure, it would have been accurate to within a minute. But Powell's time, it wouldn't have been. If your settings were wrong, it could have been off in terms of time zone, and you could have things that are off by 2 or 3 hours. So that's a huge issue, especially if you have similar or the same titles in an email. Because again, these are not as by the time of Clinton's tenure in office, there was a full electronic management system, so that it was as of similar to today's technology, where you could organize things in several different ways and search them in several different ways, and because it wasn't paper files, it could be done pretty much instantly, within a couple of seconds. But again, that was not at all the system that was set up during Powell's time. And so, and also there's a pattern of the concept of how did they respond to the request for more information? The answer is completely differently. Again, Powell responded by turning over every email address, all of his passcodes to every one of his accounts, just in case something might have gotten transferred somewhere where it didn't belong. So he had the investigators, climbing through the photos of his kids and grandkids. Okay, that's what he did. All right. Whereas Clinton hid and ducked as much as did her staff, of everything in every way that she could. Continually, at the very least, giving half-truths, claiming that she forgot, and all this stuff. I could be wrong, but as I understand it, Powell is older than she is. Okay? And, as such, and he never, had these claims of, oh, I forgot, or I might have made a mistake, in terms of this investigation. He was straight up. He's like, okay, here's everything. And also, one of the reasons, by the way, that he actually, in the beginning, in terms of setting up an email address, was because during his tenure, there wasn't a way that the government had to get and send emails outside of the State Department. The government didn't have the system set up for that yet. During Clinton's time, there was, and she was given multiple ways to do things correctly, but she continually said no, and did them her own way, and thusly bypassed the rules, and get around them at every duck and corner. They weren't, in Colin Powell's time, because of where technology was at, and where the government's place in technology was at, he actually had a good reason to do what he did. It really was to help the country in terms of enabling proper communication. All of his stuff, in terms of the communications that he did them in his office in the State Department. He didn't leave the building. With her, she went all over the frickin' planet. And the servers and everything, therefore, were at her home, hidden away. So, the reason why he did what he did in terms of the emails, which it was going and doing something that wasn't ordinarily done, but it was to get them done better. What she did was, she went out around all of the systems that were in place to do things the easy way, which in his time there wasn't really an easy way to do it, and therefore he made a way that was possible, but still fit basically everything in terms of needs for security, as best he could. But she was given multiple attempts to do things the right way. There were a lot of easy things she could have done. There were State Department approved devices that she could have used on the go she continually said, nope, I'm not going to use that. I'm going to use my own thing. I'm going to use what I'm going to use. So it was completely opposite patterns of behavior throughout. Again, we're just talking about, though, electronic communications. Again, I'm not trying to say who was clearly the better Secretary of State. I'm not. But I am saying that as well, her absolutely obscenity-ridden remark of trying to claim that he put her up to this, which seems to be one of her latest excuses in our team. No, I don't believe for a second that he put her up to this. In part because he didn't do this. He did a change in procedure to allow him to better get things done, but he never had the information in terms of that system that he used. The only reason that I don't know that the server was indeed in the State Department physically was because the software did not exist at that point. The systems did not exist, therefore. And so, but if they had it, I believe that he would have used them, because again, he tried everything that in terms of preserving information that he could, and that's the only reason that we have any data at all. But again, to put it mildly, I'm kind of conflicted about him as Secretary of State in terms of his actual tenure, but in terms of this, sorry, he did nothing wrong. And also keep in mind that that because of the way the technology was back then, in part, no one, and to some degree I could understand this because they realized how ridiculous a system this was. Not many people actually followed the full-on protocol of printing out all of the electronic communications and then putting them in the file folders. And they found that not just throughout the State Department, but throughout pretty much every government agency. In all likelihood, and I try to give people and entities of government the benefit of the doubt, it's because they might very well have realized that it was kind of a ridiculous system, that no matter what they did, in all likelihood data would still get lost. It really would, and I'm not saying that the government is perfect, but I'm saying in this particular case it's possible that it wasn't really a sinister motive, and that half the time people were just saying, this is not really going to work no matter what we do, so let's just forget. And they were lazy. But whereas with Clinton's tenure, it was active in terms of what they did. It took extra work to pull what they pulled. A lot of extra effort, a lot of extra time and energy. And that's really a huge line and a huge distinction to make.